on their way in? Good. All you kids can tell your parents you don't have to bathe tonight because you already did. So you can just go home and go to sleep. All right, so session 2 last week. You can't hear me back there in the back. My wife's saying she can't hear me. Yeah. And now apparently my daughter's mad because my wife left the room for 3 seconds. They're on their way. Awesome. Hopefully not in the convertible with the top down. That would not be suitable for them. All right, so I'll do a quick recap, and then we will jump into today's lesson. We're going to slow down a little bit. As you guys know, last week we hit thousands of years of material in an hour and a half. So that's the book of Genesis. We're slowing down in Exodus. We're just going to cover 40 plus years. It's not too bad. But what I do want to do is do a quick recap. And when I say quick, I mean like 2 sentences. And we'll talk a little bit about what we discussed last week, and we'll jump in. So as a recap, Yahweh's humans. So keep in mind, the whole point of this is we are doing a study of Yahweh. Why? Because we want to be people who can love the Lord our God better. And the best way to do that is to get to know who that God is. So Yahweh's humans, or image bearers, have rebelled and done all they can to get away from him, as we saw with the flood, the Tower of Babel, the Nephilim, everything that literally happened. But because of Yahweh's faithfulness, he has chosen a remnant, and he has secured a spot for them among one of the great nations, which is Egypt. What I mean by this is we ended Genesis with the story of Joseph. You guys know the story of Joseph? You kids ever heard the story of Joseph? Hopefully the answer is yes. He's the guy that single-handedly helps to save pretty much the whole known world at that time. But what happens is everybody decides to stay. The whole family of Israel, which is Jacob, he gets his name changed to Israel. We talked about that last week. He gets his name changed to Israel. All of them stay, the 12 tribes, in Egypt. And it's looking great, right? It's looking like people are starting to get to know the character of God. They begin to see who he is, what he is. And that's where we left off. So we now look to the book of Exodus to see just how this redemption plan that Yahweh has put in place for the whole world is going to pan out. Here's a spoiler. There are more books in the Old Testament than just Exodus. It doesn't go well. But it does begin. So what I want to ask you guys to start off with is, when you think of Exodus, what do you think of? Throw out some ideas. Chevy, go for it. I saw you raise your hand. When you think of Exodus, what do you think of? Just say Moses. What? Good? Sometimes. He's getting there. Yes, Olivia. A journey's going to happen. Okay, an Exodus. I like that. Yes. Deliverance. Okay. What did Eli say? Okay. Yahweh does give Moses the 10 Commandments. You're correct. What else happens? You guys, there's a whole big story. Yes. There's a lot of action. A lot of people die. Yeah, but there's a lot of action in it. It's really cool. What else happens in the book of Exodus? We'll take a few more. Yeah.
They leave Egypt.
They leave Egypt. Okay, good. Curtis, I saw you were wanting to answer. All kinds of stuff. Great answer. So typically, yes. The 10 plagues. Is that what you were going to say? Okay, so yes, that's a lot of water. Is it raining? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you guys stay over here. It's part of it. So actually, yeah, we're going to be talking about, yeah. No, it's about Noah. We're flipping back to Genesis. Okay, so as we settle down from the flood, because that happened last week, what I want to point out is when we think of the book of Exodus, we usually think of an Exodus from Egypt. We usually think of the 10 plagues. We usually think of Pharaoh. We usually think of the Israelites in slavery, being brought out of slavery. But that is literally less than half of the book. The other half of the book And arguably, a more important part of the book, the only reason I say more important is because it's what leads to the rest of the biblical story, is what happens after they leave Egypt. The whole fighting Egypt is really cool, and we will talk about it a little bit. But what happens after is what's essential to Israel's history, their future, what they're going to do, who are they going to be, what do they look like, and so on and so forth. So I want to introduce the book of Exodus with two phrases. The first one, and this is how it was introduced to me when I was in college, so now all you young kids are in college, so welcome. It was introduced to me as it's the book of power. There's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They all have like a theme that runs through them. And for Exodus, it's power. Obviously, we see power in other books, but Exodus is power. Leviticus is something to do with the law. Numbers is providence. And then the very last one is like the final speech. But Exodus is power because we're going to see Yahweh's power on full display. But I want to introduce it to you as the book about Yahweh's nose. We're going to see this phrase multiple times today. And at the end of today, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I actually like this. I actually get it. That's why we've got this little cute little guy here that I drew. It's supposed to be Yahweh. It's not Yahweh. How do we know this? Because all of you would be dead for looking at it. So you'll find that out here in Exodus. But we are going to see that Yahweh is all-powerful, but that his nose is also all-powerful. And so it is really cool. They actually do talk about his nose specifically. And a phrase that's thrown around in the book a lot, and actually how we're going to start the book, has to do with his nose being very long. So now you know what Yahweh's nose looks like. It's really long, kind of like my nose, so we kind of match. So I'm going to write down here, if you remember last week, these are the 3 that we talked about, attributes of Yahweh. Light is where it comes from him. Order is what he did in the beginning, and he creates life. We're going to add some to it. I'm going to keep this list running the whole time, and we'll add to it every week, so you just have a nice running list. I don't know how large my handwriting is going to be, but we're going to go for all-powerful. I think that's a good... If you can't read it, it's because my handwriting is atrocious. All-powerful is how Yahweh is described, and that's how we're going to see him in this book. But we have to begin somewhere. Keep in mind, we just ended with Joseph, okay? And we think everything's going well. It doesn't. What happens is there's a 400-year gap between Genesis and Exodus. So we jump 400 years into the future, and we find the book of Exodus. And it's in a horrible spot. Basically, Joseph and the brothers in Genesis, they're not alive because it's been 400 years, right? They're all dead. And everybody has forgotten everything that they learned. Nobody knows Joseph. Nobody knows the tribes. Nobody knows Israel. It's not a thing. How do we know this? Because nobody knows Yahweh. So Israel doesn't know God, nor does anybody around them. So they have no idea who Yahweh is. Keep in mind, they don't even know his name. Why do we know this? Because later in the story, we'll get to it. They don't know Yahweh. They've probably never even heard of him. They just know he's some God out there. And they are enslaved to Egypt. And the king of Egypt has no idea who Joseph is, doesn't care, and wants Israel kept under him. So Israel's enslaved, and we meet the most evil character in the story so far, the Pharaoh. The reason we know he's the most evil character in the story so far is because he is. It's just that simple. He starts off, and we meet him, and he's throwing babies into the river. So for you kids who thought you were getting a cool little fun message, no, he kills all the babies. So sorry about that. But now you guys know. Here's why. What happens when you're in... Let's take Chevy, for example. Chevy, what happens if you're in charge of, let's say, all your little brothers, right? Say your parents go and have 10 more kids, right? Could happen, right? No, you're right. Yeah, good answer. No, so say your parents go and have 10 more kids, but they keep telling you, hey, you're in charge, buddy. Hey, Chevy, you're in charge when we leave. Buddy, hey, Chevy, we're going to go on a vacation for 10 days. You're in charge, okay? How long do you think you're going to stay in charge for? Just give me 7 minutes. That's a good bet. And you're right, because who's going to take over immediately?
Eli.
Well, Eli is true, but guess who's going to take over after Eli has it for 7 minutes? Amani, exactly. And guess who's going to keep it the rest of those 10 days? Amani. He's probably going to keep it the rest of the 10 days. No, but you're going to be overpowered. You can't stop 10 kids from destroying you. And that's what Pharaoh sees. Pharaoh sees that the Israelites, which are their slaves, actually outnumber them by more than double. And so he's like, okay, this isn't good. Because if they get an idea in their head to just overtake Egypt, they can do it without any weapons. They could just waltz up to the temple and take it. So he says, I got an idea. Let's round up all their kids 2 and under, and let's throw them all in the river. Very important. We'll see the river later. Throws them all into what I'm going to refer to you as the abyss. Now, if you remember from last week, who dwells in the abyss? The Leviathan, which is the snake, which is the dragon, which is the enemy of God. So they drown, or they throw the kid, they kill all the children by throwing them into the abyss, which is where the snake dwells. Who's the one doing it? It's another agent of the snake, like we talked about last week. Pharaoh is the most evil agent of the snake that we have seen so far. And Yahweh is not pleased with him. So what happens is after he does that, there is one child that is saved. It's a man. It's not a man, it's a little kid, it's a baby. His name is Moses, which just means drawn from the water. So it's fitting because he's put in the water and then drawn out in a basket by none other, get this is an awesome like Pixar twist here, by the Pharaoh's daughter. So he was trying to kill all these kids, and one of these kids is now his grandson. And is going to grow up in his palace. And here's the even bigger twist. This is what's awesome. What Pharaoh does is he leaves it to his daughter. He says, you just figure it out. And she's like, I don't know how to take care of a baby. I need somebody to help me. And then a midwife just strolls up and says, oh, I'd love to help you with that baby. The joke is that's Moses' mom. So Moses grows up in the palace of the Pharaoh who tried to kill him, learning Egyptian culture and learning whatever Hebrew's left, because there's not much. So Moses grows up learning his people are oppressed, but he's supposed to be Egyptian, and they're just supposed to act like nothing ever happened. So this goes on well for some time, and then Moses goes out into where they're making bricks and stuff one day, and he sees this Israelite just getting whipped and flogged and beaten, almost to the point of death. And so Moses, what rises up in him is a bunch of anger. And what we see is we actually see a portion of God's wrath and God's anger. What he does is he attacks this Egyptian who's hurting the Israelite, and he kills him on accident. And then we also see for the first time the picture of where the Israelites are at now. Because he has just brought forth justice on this enemy of God. And how do the Israelites respond? They look at him and they say, you're nothing but a murderer. What, are you going to kill us too if we don't obey you? And so he realizes they're not on my side because they think I'm Egyptian, and they're just so upset. I just saved their life, and they're not even grateful. So he runs away. He goes and disappears into the wilderness, and we'll pick back up the story when we all make our little aluminum foil thing, because this is going to be essential for the rest of today's thing. Here's what I need you to do. I have aluminum foil. Everybody can come up and get one because I'm not good at passing them out. Get one, okay? Don't pick through. They're all the same, roughly same size. The smaller piece, the better.
Oh, just grab one. What are we doing?
You gotta go sit down, I'll tell you. There's a lot of water over there. The good news is we're talking about water today. The bad news is we're not talking about water inside of the church today. Okay, so what? Yeah, you're gonna do it too. It's okay. No, you can. Everybody else was just in the shot too. Here, I gotta get another one for Jamie too. So this is gonna be really fun. I'm gonna give you guys some time to make it. Olivia, you need one too? You got one? Does she need one? Do you need one? You got one? Okay, I guess I need one too. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about why Yahweh's nose is so long while we do this. What I need you to do is make the smallest little human that you can. Smallest little person. You can name him, you can put a face on him, you can, I don't know, make clothes for him. I don't know how you're going to do that, but figure it out. Make the smallest person you can. What I would start with doing is making it into a ball and then like Play-Doh, forming a person out of it. Don't rip pieces off or you might just have 5 different pieces of a person. You know? What? Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can rip it, but I wouldn't. I mean, if you really want to, I don't know how to do that though. So just make a person. However you would make a person, do that. Okay? So here, while you're doing this, I'm just going to explain the long of nose thing. So when we meet Yahweh in the book of Exodus, it's 400 years later, right? Israel's enslaved, everybody's in trouble, it's not good. But here's what's cool, is that it's been 400 years and God hasn't wiped Egypt off the face of the planet. And that's what you should notice and what's really important to the story as we go so far. Why this is important is it tells us that God is slow to anger. He is long-suffering. But the word in Hebrew for that is actually a phrase that is called long of nose. It literally translates to your nose is long. And here's why. When people would get angry, just as you do today, your nose gets red and it gets hot. So how they would describe somebody as being a patient person is his nose is long. It takes a while for his nose to get red hot. So he's long of nose. So because Yahweh's nose is so long, it spares Egypt from being wiped off the face of the planet for their sins in the same way that it saves Israel from being wiped off the face of the planet and all of us from being wiped off the face of the planet. So thank goodness that God has a long nose. And that's the first instance of nose we're going to meet in Exodus. What? Yours ripped? No, just leave it. Just keep it. As long as he's decently mobile. If he can crawl, that's fine. See, mine, I think I need to fix mine too. Mine's really disgusting. Mostly because I'm not an artist, but also mostly because I think this is getting it's getting really difficult to, he's got little nubs for arms. It's kind of cool.
I'm an animal.
Yours, that's good. That's perfect. That's much better than my little guy here who just looks like a potato. So, okay, so this guy that you have, just as you make him, it's okay if you're still making him. You're going to keep him. He's going to be your best friend for the next, let's say, give or take 30, 40 minutes. This guy, you just crafted him in what? 2 minutes, maybe less, maybe more. You made this guy. I want you, for the rest of this service, you guys, it's going to be dangerous, but I'm going to ask you to do it. You all are playing God. Okay? You've just created this guy. And this guy is the Pharaoh. And this guy that you just created, he actually thinks that he is God, not you. So that's the joke, because you just made this guy in like 2 minutes. And this little punk, you could say, he is claiming to be God, and not just with his words, right? He's obviously telling everybody, but with the way that he acts, taking hundreds of lives, thousands of lives, and enslaving a bunch of people, a whole nation, plus more nations, all for the sake of the fact that you all work for me because I am God, and this is how a God acts. So you can keep your little man, who is Pharaoh, but he's calling himself God. So we'll set him up. The point is that he's really small compared to you. But this is God. So Egypt, hail your God. So you've got Pharaoh. We've got a man who claims to be God. This is going to be really important, and we're going to keep him for most of today. Okay, so because we've got this man who is claiming divine authority, we've got Moses, who is now grown up as a little spy, I guess, inside of Pharaoh's house. He runs off. That's where we left the story. We're 40 years go by from when he leaves until he comes back. But while he's in the wilderness, yes. Oh, Jeff, you need a man. Here, you have to make a little man. Make him as small as you can. As small as you can. Okay, so while the little men will be fun to play with, just set them like on a seat, like here, so they can all watch, because that'll be fun. Okay, so in the 40 years, his name is not Abram, it's Moses. Moses goes through a lot. He gets married, he gets a family, he gets herds, he meets a guy named Jethro who's important that we're probably not going to talk about as much as we should. He does a bunch of stuff, but at the very end, the part I want to point out is he has this encounter with a burning what? Bush. Awesome. What is important about a bush? Can anybody tell me biblically? Yes. That's exactly right. Nothing. Why do you think Yahweh would show up in a burning bush that symbolizes nothing? Yes. That's okay, because I'm going to tell you. It's because Yahweh doesn't have to show up in something important, because Yahweh made everything and He's all powerful. It doesn't matter what I show up in, I'm Yahweh. That's why. That's the joke, is it doesn't matter. It could have been a tree. It could have been the mountain, which He does show up later. It could have been anything, but the point was, it doesn't matter what I'm in. The point is that I'm in it. So Yahweh shows up and He commissions Moses. Yeah, I got that right. It's Moses. All the names, they just, you're going to get Solomon here in a second. No, so Moses, he gets commissioned to go free the Israelites. And what does Moses say? He says no. That's right. He says, that's not going to happen. I know this bush is burning, but it's not. And I'm standing on holy ground. I already take my sandals off. And you already, turn my staff into a snake. But the answer is no. It's just not going to happen. And what does God do? He says, I'll send your brother with you. Every excuse that Moses comes up with, Yahweh says, I've got an answer for it. Like I've already figured this out. You don't have, you keep pulling stuff out of the air, but I'm God. Like I'm Yahweh. But here's what's really cool, and what I want to point out, and the reason why we can say Israel has no idea who their God is, or what He is, or who He is, or if they even have a God, because of what Moses asks. Keep in mind, he's grown up learning probably the most of Hebrew culture and Egyptian, because he grew up in the palace, and yet he asks this question. He says, who do I tell them is sending me to free them? So they don't know the law. They don't know what God requires. They don't know who God is. He's never even heard of this guy. He knows He's powerful, just like Abram did when he showed up, but he doesn't know who this is. So he says, who do I tell them is sending me? Because they're going to ask. And God, He's not bewildered because He knows his heart and his mind. But He says, tell them Yahweh sent you, the God of Isaac, Jacob, and your ancestors. So I guess they knew who Isaac and Jacob were, or they knew Israel, but that was about the extent of what they knew. They didn't know who God was or what His name was. So they meet Him as Yahweh. Here's the fun fact. You guys know what Yahweh means in Hebrew? Yeah, it means that I am that I am. And obviously the name is not a joke, but the joke within the name is that I am because I exist. I exist because I exist. That's who I am. Because nothing else is anywhere close to as powerful as Yahweh is. So He doesn't need a reason to exist or do anything. He just does. And as we meet His attributes, we'll see that He does these things just because of who He is. And that if you're going to serve or follow any God, that if they don't have all these attributes, then they're nowhere near as powerful as Yahweh, because He is the inventor of these attributes, and yet these are all the good things that we find in the world. So this is what's really cool with Yahweh, is His name literally means I am over and in everything, and there is nothing that can touch me. Why? Because I am. And that's why when Jesus stands up, we'll get there eventually, and says that phrase, they can't help but fall down. Like creation literally just moved. The earth shook and knocked these people back. Why? Because they can't stand under the weight of the I am. So it literally means I am. And so Moses goes and let's see, I want to skip down here before we get to the end. Okay, he returns to Egypt with his brother, Aaron, and I have commenced Yahweh's divine justice and clear superiority among gods. So here's what happens. He goes back, and since we're making really good time, we've only been going for like 20 minutes, and we're doing good. So we're about to enter everybody's favorite part of the book of Exodus. This is the plague. Keep in mind, you still got your little guy. Everybody still got your little guy? Okay, awesome. This is Egypt. This is your God. What a little guy. But this is your God. So keep him close. You don't want to lose him. He's a really important guy. You can tell from his size. So we're about to enter the plagues. What happens before the plagues, though, is I think a really cool story. Moses waltzes in to the, I keep wanting to say pyramid. That's not the case. But when you think of Egypt, that's all you think of. He waltzes into whatever palace this guy had. Could have been a pyramid. You don't know. But you know what? If you remember our rules of how to read the Bible, we don't ask the Bible questions it wasn't written to answer. So don't wonder if he had a pyramid. It doesn't matter. So he waltzes into, let's call it a castle. Why not be medieval with it? He waltzes into the castle and he demands to see this Pharaoh. And of course, he's allowed an audience. Why? Because he's a man of God? No, because he's the grandson of the Pharaoh. And when the grandson shows up to the palace, you say, oh, okay, yeah, like, cool, waltz on in. Sure, you killed a guy, but it's been 40 years. Hopefully you guys have forgotten, and I haven't been in exile too long. So the grandson shows back up with his brother, and he waltzes in, and he says, hey, you're not going to like this. But there's this guy. He's not guy. He's a God. His name's Yahweh. And he'd really like it if you let the Israelites go. And Pharaoh responds by saying, what sign do you have? Right? How can you prove to me that some God sent you in here? Because we've got gods, and I haven't heard anything from them. So Moses says, okay, I will show you. I will throw my staff on the ground, and it will become a snake. Which sounds really cool. Or if you're like, I really don't like that, it doesn't sound cool. At least it sounds powerful, right? Yahweh can turn a stick, which he created because it's part of life. Keep in mind the tree. He can turn it to another totally different form of life. Turns into a snake. And so Pharaoh's unimpressed because he says, I've got my magicians here. Check them out. Brings all of them out. He says, you guys throw your staffs down. We got magic too. They throw the staffs down. Those staffs all become snakes. And so for a moment, as the reader, you're like, oh, great. So Yahweh is just, he can do magic tricks like these guys can do magic tricks. But then there's a twist. Their sticks are all snakes. But Yahweh's snake swallows up the rest of the snakes, which I think is so cool because if you remember, our enemy of God is a snake. And he's a serpent. And the joke is that even God made the serpents. So the enemy serpents can't stand up to the fact that Yahweh made the serpents and I can swallow your serpents and you can't do anything. And that's the joke. And so he's standing there, he's like, man, none of my guys have staffs anymore because they're all inside of Moses' staff. And then he picks it up and it becomes a staff again. Moses is like, I've got another one. I can stick my hand inside and it's leprous. And then I can stick my hand inside and it's not leprous. Like, there we go, leprosy left. And Yahweh's awesome. And you would think that would do something. But we get a little phrase after this first encounter. He asks, let people go or there will be judgment. And Pharaoh says, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. So we've got this right here. First time. Pharaoh hardens his own heart. He says he hardened his heart against what the Lord was doing. And he says, no. So go away. Moses goes away. The plague happens. He comes back a second time. And he says, Pharaoh, please let them go, or there's going to be more destruction upon your city, this nation. And Pharaoh, once again, hardens his own heart and says no. Okay? So we're 0 for 2 now, which might be looking bad for the Israelites, but the joke is it's not bad for the Israelites. They increase the workload, but every time they increase the workload, the plague gets worse for Egypt. The point is that Yahweh is in control, and whatever this little God down here is trying to do just amounts to him suffering more. Every step he takes away from Yahweh, he gets crushed more and more and more until it actually affects his family. Happens a third time. What does he do? That's important. Good. Does it a fourth time? What does Pharaoh do? It's important that he hardens his heart. Okay. Comes back a fifth time. You would think by time 5 we have learned our lesson. The answer is no, because pride is a really funny thing. What does Pharaoh do? Okay, and we're going to stop here for a second. I'm going to write. That was really loud. Sorry for yelling that. So the first 5 times, and it's really important because as especially you young ones get older and you'll hear stuff about the Bible, and you older ones have probably already heard this. Man, what kind of God hardens a person's heart just to lead them into their own demise? Well, Correct answer. But the joke is Yahweh didn't start out doing it. This punk had 5 opportunities to change his heart. And every time he chose to be an agent of the snake, every time he chose to bow his knee, instead of ruling the beast, he let the beast rule him. So God says, okay, you want to play God? I'll show you God. You think you got control over your heart and your actions right now, and you did for the first 5. But now for the next 5, you're not going to increase the workload, but for the next 5, I am going to put my foot down and I'm going to harden your heart myself. And it actually says in Scripture, Yahweh, the last 5, he hardens Pharaoh's heart himself. Yahweh waltzes in and says, because you won't let him go, you're going to suffer 5 more, and this one's on me. You did the first 5 yourself thinking that you're God. Well, I'm going to show you God. And also, another fun joke is that each of these 10, I haven't studied it, so I'm not going to tell you which of the people out there, they get paid a lot of money to do all these little cool things. And what they found is that each of the different plagues also reflected a different god that Egypt worshipped. And the joke was that Yahweh is so much more powerful, he even commands those gods. Like, you think your gods are in control? No. Yahweh is the God among gods. And they all bow to him. And when he says there's locusts, there's locusts. When he says there's no rain, there's no rain. When he says to the sun, which is their almighty God, when he says to the sun, don't you shine, the sun doesn't get to shine. And so we see our all-powerful, long-nosed Yahweh, who is in control of everything. So remember, I told you at the very beginning, this book has a lot to do with Yahweh's power, and that's what we're going to see. We'll meet some other characteristics, but his power is what's very important. So Pharaoh does the first 5. Yahweh helps him out and does the last 5. Now, why does this help out Israel? Because Yahweh knows, and in Pharaoh's heart, the only thing that is going to get him to let these people go is if those plagues, because keep in mind, he's in the palace, not much is affecting him, is if the plagues waltz right in through his front door and start taking his family. In the same way that Pharaoh, what did he do? He threw away God's family, straight into the abyss where the snake lives. And so Yahweh waltzes in, literally sends an angel, waltzes in the front door and kills his firstborn son. Kills everybody in Egypt's firstborn son. But what's the point of that? It's an exact mirror of this guy playing God in the first chapter, throwing babies into the abyss. And Yahweh says that is not what a God does, but if that is how you're going to treat and that's how you're going to act, and that's exactly what you're going to get back. And so Yahweh waltzes in and throws the firstborn of every Egyptian son into the waters. And so we find, after I think it's 10 chapters, about chapter 10 or 11, Pharaoh is finally fed up with the plagues, and he lets them go because he's lost his firstborn son. He didn't care about the fact that the rest of Egypt is in turmoil and dying. He cares about the fact that it has now affected him personally, and he's not happy. So he sends the Israelites away. But keep in mind, he's still, in his head, is God over Egypt. And we see that in one chapter. So we've got these, we've got the plagues, we've got our long-of-nosed God. We're beginning to see some of these. And Israel now ventures into, it's not the wilderness yet. Yes, they're leaving Egypt. Wilderness is for the next couple books. But they journey to this place. Well, before we get there, they journey out and they get camped right at what's called the Red Sea. You guys know this story? Anybody ever heard this story? I feel like this is the one of 3 stories that I teach in the preschool, and I just cycle through it all the time. So you'd think you'd have more stories, but you got to also keep them on the for babies, and you can't really tell you got to use sensitivity. Look,
thousands drowning is always
I can't tell them about tens of thousands drowning. Even the Noah story is kind of tough to tell kids. So they're like, oh, what happened to everybody else? It's like, well, they all died. They all drowned. Yeah. All the dogs and cats. Yeah. Cats especially. But that was good. Yahweh saw that it was good. Okay, so it doesn't actually say that in Scripture. But cats are, I don't know if you guys know this, they are a sign of the devil and everything that's evil. So I just wanted to give you guys that. That's Hebrew. I don't know Hebrew, so I couldn't tell you. Okay, we get past that. Okay, so as we come to the end of the first half is what I call it. Seth, I love you, and I just want to let you know to have a good day. He's got to go to another group because he's leading the group elsewhere. But he decided to swing by because he loves me. Okay, so we jump to Exodus 12. Everybody just love Exodus 12. Can I get a show of hands who actually enjoys Exodus 12? Nemo, we know you like it. Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, so in Exodus 12, something really cool happens. And by really cool, I mean really hilarious. We get a little picture of Pharaoh. And he's sitting there with his advisors, and he's like, man, that was really dumb to send all of our slaves away. That didn't make sense when it was tens of thousands of people. All production in Egypt has literally stopped. What were we thinking? I know we all lost our kids and like the whole nation, but like, what were we thinking? We should totally go get them back. You know what would be a good idea? If we raced all of our warriors out after these tens of thousands of slaves with no weapons, and let's just gun them down on the way because they can't get past the sea. That's a great idea. It's not like God has literally touched every other element of Egypt so far except for the sea, though he did touch the water and turn it to blood. So they're like, let's just go do this. Now, did Yahweh have a part to play in this? Absolutely, because that's just how crafty and genius that he is. So he sends these guys. As I say he, I mean our little God right here. He sends these guys, and he goes with them. He goes with them with all of his chariots and all of his armed men, and they just start marching, and they start racing toward where Egypt has left. A fun thing to note about Egypt leaving is they were actually paid to leave. So not only did they lose all of their slaves, Egypt, because they were so fed up with getting destroyed, the Egyptians paid them silver, gold, idols, money, things, their own slaves, foreigners, kids. They paid them to leave. They gave them extra things so that they would leave and stop pestering them, so that their God would go with them and leave Egypt be. So they've not only lost, Egypt's not only lost their entire source of production, they've not actually lost their stuff because their people are literally paying them to get out of here. So we find a super wealthy Israelite people now walking through the wilderness or, the desert with a ton of stuff, like just a bunch of gold, silver, everything that's all going to be used to worship Yahweh. Just kidding. We'll find that out in Exodus 30 something. So as we start trekking, they're happy. They're like, oh, this is kind of going well for the first little bit. And then it immediately turns around because they look and they see Egypt following them. And instead of being like, well, we just lived through all the plagues and none of them really affected us, what they say is, oh, we told you back in Egypt, Moses, you should have just left us. Because even, there, at least we would have been happy, even though they were never happy a single time. And anytime we've met them, they were just complaining. But here's the point. We're going to start to see the lines blur between Egypt and Israel. And when we get to the end of the book, we'll see. We'll see when we get there. But you will begin to see that there's a people of God, but they in Egypt, they look a lot alike. And that's the point. So they're sitting there complaining. They're like, Moses, this is not good. Like we're going to die. You brought us out here. You should have just left us. It would have been so much better for us. Our kids would have had a happy life. We could have all had our bat mitzvahs. It would have been great. And that you brought us out here, and now they're going to kill us. At least we would have been alive there. And so then Yahweh talks with Moses, and Moses doesn't even ask this. Yahweh he takes that cloud that they've been following, the cloud, which we didn't talk about, but in the desert, it was a cloud of dust by day, cloud of fire by night. That cloud goes behind all the Israelites. And what it says, and it's really cool language, what it says is actually one of the plagues that we already saw. It says that basically this cloud stretched all the way up to the sky. because it said on one side of the cloud where the Israelites were, it was day. And then on the other side of the cloud, where the Egyptians were for the whole time, it was night. So nobody could see, and it wasn't just like night, like we could use our torches, like it was like a fog. So they couldn't see anything. So it literally says they're running around in circles all day and all night until Moses talks with Yahweh, and then Yahweh does his thing, which we're going to see here in a moment. But what's really cool about it is we see just one of the plagues that, like, they've already seen this happen, but they're still complaining. And Yahweh, while they're complaining, just goes behind them, covers them, gives them light, because again, he is the source of all light, and just blacks out the rest of the Egyptians. So the Egyptians can't get to them. But they're still sitting here on the shore. And so Yahweh says to Moses, he says, why are you like yelling out for me? He says, just stop, pick up your staff, hold it out over the waters, and watch what I do. And he picks up the staff, opens the waters, you guys know the story, splits in half, walls of water on both sides. And then, this is what's important, and we'll talk about it when they sing the song. Then a blast of air comes through, parting the waters and drying the entire land. And you're like, okay, that's cool. Like, yeah, it's a miracle. It's really awesome. And the Israelites begin to walk through. Keep in mind, 20 seconds ago, they were grumbling and complaining, we should have just died in Egypt, blah, 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 blah. They walk through one sea, and then they get to the other side, and they immediately start singing songs of praise to their God like they know him at all. However, what is really cool is it's clear that by the time they get to the other side, they actually do know some about him. Because the song they sing is very, very personal. And so it's really cool that you see a total shift, sort of, it doesn't last long. You see a total shift in, I think is it 15? I think it's 15. I have it pulled up here. No, that's 34. Give me a second, let's jump to it. 15, it is 15? Okay. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, okay, Red Sea encounter. Okay, this is where we're going to, before we get to their song, we're going to pick up our little man. Okay, you see our little guy? We really like him. Everybody have your little guy. Everybody pick him up, because this is going to be really important. I'm going to have you do something with him, and it's going to be awesome. So pick up your little guy. If you're in the baby cave, stop worrying about the babies. Pick up your little guy. Very important. And I don't mean Jasper. Please don't pick him up and do what we're about to do. You're going to take this little guy, and you can use your hand, because I don't want to like break the table and my dude's really dense. I'm going to put him on the ground. Keep in mind, this is Egypt. This is your God. You're following him, and we're just going to crush him. You're going to destroy this little guy. You're going to look at this. Behold, Egypt, your God. See, we like it. So you've got your little guy. You can go ahead and fold him. You can break him, whatever you want to do. Because here's what happens. The Egyptians follow, and now keep in mind, hey, okay, if you're going to, I wouldn't rip him apart, because then you got to pick up all the little pieces, because I don't know how to vacuum, so I won't be able to do that. So do pick up your little pieces if you do it. But take your guy, now that he's been crushed, and just set him down, because he no longer exists. Yours does? Well, go ahead and crush him. Crush him again. Okay, no, but here's what's important. Here's what we're going to see. So the Israelites make it through, and then the Egyptians start to follow. And of course, what does Yahweh do? He pulls a little trick maneuver, right? They've all got their chariots, and those are the ones out front. And so he stops blowing that air through there, and then what happens to the ground? It turns into mud, which means the chariots can't move. So they get stuck. So the whole armies are just stuck there. And what do the guys in front say? Because they're actually the geniuses of this whole thing. They look and see, man, we've got mountains of water on both sides, and we're stuck in the dead middle of an ocean. Maybe, hey guys, let's, instead of piling in, let's turn around and go back that way. Let's just return and let them have their peace. But the joke is, they've already committed too far and too long. They're not getting off the hook. So the moment they realize what's happening, God just stops whatever he's doing. We're going to find out what he's doing here in a second. He just stops, and the waters, they just crush back down. And what does it say that happens to the Egyptians? It says, and they're all lost. Where? Yes, yes, it does. It does mention they walked through in the heart of the sea, but what is that? It's the abyss. So guess what? The snake goes back to its home. Where does the snake live? It lives in the abyss. Leviathan dwells in the abyss. And we've just met the biggest snake in the entire Bible. I'm not talking about Satan. The biggest agent of the snake who has chosen to be a snake, Pharaoh. And God says, okay, you want to play snake? We'll play snake. Go back to your home. And he buries him. And so the snake now lives and dwells and dies in his own home. And the flip side to it is that is all that awaits a snake. If you're going to be an agent of the snake, all that's going to happen is God's going to put you right back where he made you, in the abyss. And you don't come back out from the abyss. And that's the point of the story of Pharaoh. When we meet Yahweh and Pharaoh, we see two very different gods. Right? We see one who is all-powerful and one who just really wants to be. And the joke is, he's not even powerful enough to survive in his own habitat because he drowns. And not just him, everybody who decided it would be a good idea to follow this God dies too. And so if we actually go back and look at it, Egypt has now lost all of its production value. It has now lost all of its valuables because it paid them. And now it has no leaders. Egypt's not a country anymore. Why? Because it wouldn't let God's people go, and Yahweh, the Father, decided to step in. And when the Father decided to even just step in, they were no longer a country. Didn't even exist. Wiped off the map. Yes, they show up later in Scripture, but they are never as powerful as they were in Exodus. Anytime you see them, they're a vassal country, which just means like a lesser country to Babylon. They're not important. And so it's kind of cool. You see them as this all-powerful entity, and the joke is, in the moment, and not even half a book, they no longer exist. And here's what's cool, is when they sing a song in Exodus 15, what Yahweh reveals to them is what happened is, you know how we crush this with our hands and with our feet? Like, Chevy's eating it with his mouth. That's really cool. But it took us exerting force to crush this. And in Exodus 15, what they say is that the parting of the Red Sea. I don't know how to make a C. I'll just do this. And then it gets parted, right? So that's the part. And then there's more walls. The parting of the Red Sea was done by Yahweh literally breathing through his nose. It said, by your nose, you split the sea. We had to exert force to crush this, and all Yahweh had to do was just stop breathing out his nose, and he drowned every last one of the snakes. And so it's a huge picture of Yahweh's power. And so if you're here today and you're like, man, I serve Yahweh and I really love him, but he doesn't seem that powerful. His nose could wipe out every single one of your enemies in an instant. And the joke is his son already did. But what's just so cool about this song is it could be God outstretching his hand. It could be him moving or getting up or standing. He didn't even have to leave his throne. The guy just stops breathing out of his nose. And these 100-foot walls of water just obliterate the enemy. That's how powerful he is. And what's crazy is they sing this song. It's not like Yahweh is like, Moses, here's a song, sing it about me. They sing it, the Spirit comes upon them, they sing it. Miriam begins to sing with all of it. They start playing instruments, they begin to bless Yahweh. They start singing it. This is the power that they have seen, that even Yahweh's nose could kill thousands of people, of enemies. Keep in mind, they just saw this. It's really important that you know they just saw this and sung about it. Because Exodus 16 through 18, one chapter later, is Israel complaining, having horrible hearts, and being frankly terrible children. Oh, but they're being great children of the snake. They're just being horrible children of Yahweh. And so, the difference, though, is that because of God's promise, God still provides for them anyway. And I want to pause here and just take a question or ask a question. If anybody, well, I'll ask a first question, a precursor question. Did anybody go and read any of Exodus this week or look at it? And that's good that Chevy did and Eli did. It's okay if you didn't. It's a big book. There's 40 chapters. But did anybody look at it at all or read anything? That's good. That's good. You don't need to read. The reading is just what the government tells you to do. It's a scheme of the government to make you smarter. Don't fall for it. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. From what you've seen, because you see them, they grumble, they complain, they say, Moses, we'd be better off dead. And in Exodus 18, we end right at the base of Mount Sinai, which is going to be the center point for the rest of the book. But I'm going to stop and take a break here. What attributes have you seen so far? Isn't the story that I've told or that you know? What attributes have you seen in both the Egyptians and the Israelites so far in the story? I want things that are the same because it's important as we come to the close of the book and Torah as a whole. Yes. They're really dumb at times. Correct. Yeah. They both fall to the snake almost every time. Yes. Okay. What else have we seen? Lots of snake talk. Yes. Pride. Lots of pride. Absolutely. Yeah, they are. There's a lot of grumbling and complaining today. You guys ever been to Facebook? Yeah, me too. Anything else? What else have we seen? Stubborn. Okay, that's a really good one. I'll add one to them. Oh yeah, go ahead. They usually let down God and deny Him. Yes, they do. I'll add, yeah, go ahead. There are none. There's none of the 9. Yes. Yes. Well, and I think let's talk about that for a little bit. The whole point of this story, and it starts off 400 years in the future, and God is still being patient, and they make it not even a day or two out of Egypt, and they can't help but say, man, I wish we were dead. Like, how short-sighted do you have to be and impatient? But then, obviously, you look at our world today, and oh man, my Wi-Fi won't load. What am I going to do? Like, so we can see how we get there. But it's important. There's a huge contrast between Yahweh and His image bearers. But there's not very much of a contrast at all between His image bearers and the beast. We've seen both Yahweh and the beast act in this story. And the more that we see of Israel, man, the more we see of the beast and not Yahweh. And yet, Yahweh is always right there with them. And we're going to discover why before we get to the end of the book. But one thing I will also add is Israel, and which is really cool to think about. Think about it like this. Israel has probably been enslaved for, let's say they got enslaved 100, 200 years ago. It could have been enslaved all 400, but I doubt it because Joseph was there. So they get enslaved for 100 years, right? They've been slaves for generations. The people over them have been oppressors for generations. Well, actually, we know they've been oppressors for hundreds of years because Joseph was even enslaved and saw people enslaved in Egypt. So they've been oppressors for hundreds of years. These guys have been enslaved for, let's say, hundreds of years. And yet, the moment they get freedom, who do they look like? The Egyptians. They look like the people that have been oppressing them. Instead of being, rejoicing and praising Yahweh and being thankful, they say, well, you know what? It worked for them. They preserved themselves quite well, even though they just saw the destruction of literally every single one of them. They say it worked for them quite well, and they begin to act just like them. And the joke is, you would think, no, we would never do that. Like, we can't ever let ourselves get there. But how easy is it the moment you get that freedom to just jump to whatever you want to do? Because think about it. They're like, man, we haven't been able to do whatever we want to do. And now we can. Let's complain. It's like, what? But that's where they're at. So the point of that question was, I wanted you guys to see that we're starting to not see much of a difference. God just saved His people from another people, But his people look a lot like that people. So what's he going to do? Well, that's what the rest of the Bible's about. And we're not going to get there today. But what we are going to do is the point that, just if you're jotting down anything, the point that I want to make out of that question, though, is all the ungodly, whether oppressed or oppressors, they all end the same way. And it's selfish and driven by self-preservation. What was their whole argument? Man, if you just left us in Egypt, at least we'd have food, right? At least we'd be able to eat. At least we, at least I, at least my family, at least me, at least it's all about being better for me, right? Forget the fact that I'm bringing a messianic promise to the world. My family would have been better off in Egypt being slaves and being beaten every day. No, that's not the case, but that's what they're telling themselves. So we are at 6:30. Okay. So we moved decently fast. We hit a little bit. Okay, there's a part 2, and it's 21 chapters long. We're not going to hit all 21 chapters, and it's actually my shorter part because the first part is kind of cool. But this is the second part you don't usually hear about when you read Exodus. So we do want to dial in for this one. I don't have any cool little people. You can just hold this one, I guess, because he's dead. Just enjoy him. Okay, Mount Sinai, Exodus 19 through 40 is the Mount Sinai incident, is what I call it, because the whole thing takes place at Mount Sinai. They do not leave Mount Sinai until the end of Leviticus, actually. So the beginning of Numbers. So they do not leave Mount Sinai for 2 books. And they're pretty important books. So Mount Sinai is where the rest of the book takes place, and the centerpiece for this part. Before we go anywhere else, does anybody have any questions about the first part? I guess I should have asked that. Do we have any questions or things that's like, man, I never saw it that way, or like, hey, I don't know anything about that? Yes.
How does that fit in on the because I know like you fight for contentment and Paul
Yes.
is content, but
Yes.
complaining is so throughout the Old Testament.
It is, and it is. It's always looked at as a sin, or at least toward Yahweh, because what complaining is doing is it's you saying you could do it better. It's you saying I should be God. Yeah, because think about it. If the whole thing is, we had food back in Egypt. Okay, so you think God's idea to get you out of Egypt was a bad idea, and so then you're putting yourself on the throne, and that's what Israel's going to do this whole time. And when we get to the wilderness, the same thing. The whole point is they keep taking Yahweh off the throne and putting themselves there. And every single one of them dies because of it. Like that's the joke is, again, they all end up the same way. All agents of the beast end up swallowed up by the water, by the earth, as we see in Korah, in the ground, bitten by other snakes. Like this, by the way, the snake theme, or the dragon beast theme, super cool theme to follow through Scripture. Whenever we do get to the point, I think it's in Numbers, when Israel gets their curse, is they become attacked by a snake. Like it all plays the same, but it's really cool.
You say that complaining is a sign of discontentment in your life. You're not happy with something.
Yeah.
And that would lead back to the garden, the original lie of the enemy who tells them, listen, you shouldn't be satisfied.
Yeah.
He's trying to hold you back, hold you down.
Like you could have more.
You should be discontent where you're at. So if
Yeah.
you eat this, then your contentment can be found in it, because he's a God that will keep you discontent.
Yeah.
When you're complaining because I'm not
Yeah, that's it.
we're not going to have better.
I was going to say that's a great way to put it, because it is. Yeah, well, it was okay. It was really good. You should be a pastor. No, but absolutely, that's exactly. It goes straight back to the garden. Have I mentioned snakes? I don't know. Okay, this whole section, because we gotta zip fast. This whole section it literally begins by reiterating the promise to Abram. Can anybody reiterate that promise? Not word for word, just give me the gist of the promise to Abram. Yes, Olivia. He did promise that he would have many children. Yes, absolutely, many children would come from him. Yes. He would have tons of relatives, yes. There was you guys remember, the word is messianic that we'll talk about, but a messianic promise. In that same thing, he talked about you'll have many children, and then the rest of the part is the meat that we're going to talk about here. Does anybody remember it? Nemo, I know you remember it. I'm just kidding. What it was is that through you, all nations will be blessed. And then he says, I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. We've already seen that just play out. So we know that part of the prophecy is true. So the rest of that must be coming. And so he reiterates it word for word, but this time Yahweh doesn't make it a mystery. Because to Abram, he just said, I will bless all nations through you. And nobody had any idea what that meant. And in Exodus, one book later, he explains exactly how he's going to do it. So he gives that same promise, and then he says, so he gives the promised blessing to all nations, but this time God adds the how they will bless all nations. And it's through being a kingdom of priests unto the nations on God's behalf. Here's a good note, and this is what's important for the rest of the Torah we're going to talk about, and when Jesus comes. Priests have to be in the presence of Yahweh to be priests. You have to work in the presence of Yahweh, or otherwise you're not a priest. The other tribes, when we get to Numbers, aren't priests because they're outside of the presence of Yahweh. So, just a fun note, but now we see how. We now know the promise is going to be, lots of people, Israel, bless all nations, but through being a kingdom of priests. We also know about the Messiah coming, and we saw that in Genesis. We will talk more about that as well. But the point that they're supposed to get is you all as a nation are to be a kingdom of priests, taking Yahweh as image bearers to the other nations. Doesn't go well. God extends the hand for them to become his kingdom of priests, and they reject it. What Yahweh says is, hey, don't come on the mountain right now. I'm purifying it. I'm making it holy and clean. When it's holy and clean, he says, all right, with a voice of thunder, he says, you all can come up, be my people, I will be your God. And that's the end of the sermon, guys. I think I'm just kidding. And so what happens is he says, you guys come up, and I'm willing to talk to you now. And all the people say, no way, we're going to die. So Moses, you just go up there and be his person. He'll be your God. And then you just tell us what he says. Because they're lazy. Even though they just worked for so long, and they just were trekked through the wilderness where all they're literally doing is walking, and God is feeding them, like literally bottle feeding them, and just opens waters for them. And they're like, I don't really want to do all the work climbing that mountain. And I don't want to die. So we're just, again, self-preservation. Well, what if Yahweh's a liar? What if he says, come on up here, and he really just wants me to die? One, have you seen him lie once? No. Have we seen him do anything but be good to you and keep you safe? Right? So why would he kill you at the Mount Sinai? But nobody thinks. They're, again, just being taunted by the snake, which is right at the base of the mountain, just talking to him. And why do we know it's right at the base of the mountain? Because of what we're about to find out. So, once again, God extends it. Only person who accepts is Moses. Moses comes up on the mountain, and Moses is the only person that goes into the presence of God. Obviously, he hides his face. He takes his shoes off. He's on holy ground. Once again, same thing that happens with the fire bush that was on fire. Once again, God can still work with only one person. If Moses was the only one willing to or wanting to leave Egypt, he could work with it. Now that they're in the wilderness, he can still just work with one priest and make it work for all the nations. It's really cool. If that's all there is, then he can make it work for his plans and purposes. Note, Moses is the only character in the story living out what it actually looks like to be a true child of Yahweh. He bucked at first, saying, I can't speak good and all this. But he's so far done everything to the letter that God has told him to do. Man, we've seen that with somebody, right? Abram. He is the only person that we've seen so far, and Noah, that did exactly what God did or said to do to the T. And guess what never happened to them? They were never out of God's protection or his hand. Like, he kept them the whole way through. So God seeks to help them live as priests, even though they just rejected it, while also restoring his own presence on earth and among his people. Keep in mind, the whole point that we saw back in the garden is the people lost the garden. He's trying to get them all back into his presence. He does start through the tabernacle, at least he seeks to do so. And if we have questions on that, that's why I'm trying to get through this fast so we can talk about those things. In Exodus 25 through 31, he gives the tabernacle blueprints. And here's what's cool. What Moses is supposed to do immediately is go down the mountain and build the tabernacle. He gives the 10 commandments, plans the tabernacle. Okay, Moses, go down there and make it happen. Moses goes down. And Exodus 32 through 34, God has a redemption plan ready and set in motion. Tabernacle commands, everybody's getting ready to get cleaned up. But his people are already rebelling at the bottom of the mountain while this is happening, and so he has to deal with it. We won't talk exactly about how all that happens. Basically, God says, I'm going to destroy every single one of them. And Moses reminds God of his promise to Abram. And God says, because it's in my character and I'm faithful, we will keep it alive because you've interceded on their behalf. And I can work with that, Moses. I can work with you. I can't work with them, which is why all of them that were just participating in that are in fact going to die. And the rest are going to eat gold. And so the ones who started it get cursed. They die. Then everybody has to eat the gold so they can feel the weight of what they've done. But here's what's really cool is because they sin in 32, and it keeps going, and God deals with it. Moses cracks the stones. Everybody's mad. But God, through his punishments, he cleanses them to a point where they can now build the tabernacle. It didn't stop God's plan. It stopped it for one chapter. Right? The plan was supposed to be in 31, he gives the tabernacle blueprints. 32, they're going to build it. Well, for 32 and 33, they don't get to build it. And in 34, he cleans it all up. He says, you grind up their statue, they're going to eat it, they're going to begin to worship me, you consecrate the people, and then go get Bezalel. I'm going to put my spirit on them, we're going to build that tabernacle. So even in their massive attempt, and I know there's like, well, they weren't trying to, foil God's plans, whatever. Even in their in the snake's massive attempt to get the entire nation to rebel against Yahweh, it takes Yahweh half a chapter to fix it and tell them, okay, in my eyes, I've now set you guys apart. And even though you all broke your side of the covenant, I made a covenant not just to you, but to Abram and to Moses and to Adam, and I'm going to keep those. So he follows through. They consecrate the people. Everyone gets good. But what's really cool, and this is what I want to talk about in Exodus 34, before we wrap this up quickly. We're going to get the rest of the attributes that we're going to talk about. So all powerful, we got that one. I'm going to write the word patient, but just know it's the nose thing. If you want to write nose thing in your notes, that'd be awesome. So you always remember, and that's really bad. I was writing completely sideways. Okay, so basically Moses goes back up there. God gives him a new stone tablets, or he says, make them yourself. I'm not doing the work this time since you broke them. You really cool guy. And then the Lord says, Moses, basically fall on your face. I'm about to tell you something really important. And he says, I am the Lord, the compassionate. Ooh, I'm getting old. The compassionate. I swear, here's what I feel like, and you kids will understand this one day. I feel like every kid that I have, I gain 10 years. So right now, I'm 42 years old. So just know that. Just know, with 2 kids, I'm 42 years old. And she's 95. Jeff's 113. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Oh, you guys are talking about with kids. Oh, sorry. So anyway, no, and I'm willing to not really fight anybody on that, but I will fight people on that. I feel like you gain 10 years every kid you like. I'll literally bend down to get something. I'm like, oh, my back. Like the other day I was helping my friend and we're the same age. And I was like, man, I don't know if my back can carry this up the stairs. He's like, you're younger than I am. What do you mean? But kids will do that to you. I think. I don't know. I've only had them for 2 years, so we'll get there when we get there. Okay, compassionate and gracious. So if you're keeping track, which you should be, because there is a test on week 7, and if you fail it, you're not allowed to come back to church. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It says, compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger. Okay. Slow to anger. You don't have to be able to read it. Just know that's what it says. Slow to anger. I don't know why I keep putting the cap on this. Abounding in love. So he's loving, but he's abounding in it. You guys know why he's abounding in it? Because it comes from him. and faithfulness. Okay. Well, we saw that with Abram, but I wanted to put it here because he says it with his own mouth. Okay. Maintaining love for thousands and forgiving. So he's forgiving wickedness and sin, and get this, and rebellion, which just literally happened. And that's what's so cool is in Exodus 34, he's in the middle of telling Moses, this is how you're going to fix it. And then he also says, but I'm fixing it because I'm a God who forgives injustice and wickedness and rebellion, which they were literally doing while I was giving you the holy law. The last part he says, and this is what's really important, some people just really love these, and they don't listen to the last thing Yahweh says. Forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet, God does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Other translations say, yet he does not leave injustice unpunished, or something to that effect. So we're going to put, he is just. Because he is the judge, and when he judges, it is just. And here's what's important about this. Because he's about to hand out, and he's about to say, hey, my holiness and my lack of love for sin is going to turn a lot of people away, or if they begin to follow and continue doing this, it's going to kill a lot of people. So you need to know that it is just, and that what they're doing isn't just hurting them, it's hurting everybody. When Israel rebels in the book of Numbers with Korah, it doesn't just hurt Korah and his family. It fractures Israel almost in half, and almost half of them have to be swallowed up and destroyed. It hurts a lot of people when you step out of line. And not just step out of line, when you step out of Yahweh's line. In the same way that Pharaoh, when he decided to, which he was never on the right track, but when he steps out of line and throws all those babies, that destroys how many families and generations to come? Well, the point of the Exodus story is it didn't even destroy the next generation because Moses was there. But the point of it was to hurt everybody else. And the grumbling and the complaining, wanting to go back to Egypt, what would that have done? It would have brought probably hundreds more years of slavery, and then maybe somebody else would have had to been raised up. It would have hurt everybody. But nobody, it's all not thinking selfish. So these are the attributes of Yahweh that we've seen so far in the story, and that we're going to stop with. We're not going to hit any more before we end the book. Really quickly, it's 7:47. I want to leave at least 10 minutes to talk about what we've read. Basically, God, while the rebellion is happening, so he has to deal with it. He deals with it. They're horrible priests. They're bad children again. All around failures for the most part. And yet Yahweh keeps trying for redemption. And in Exodus 34, we just read that he introduces himself for the first time in all of Scripture. And this is what he says about himself. So if this is the first time we've seen it, it's probably really important that we keep this in the back of our mind anytime we see Yahweh the rest of the Bible and before, that this is how he describes himself. So Exodus, and what's really cool is right after Exodus 34, when he says this, Exodus 35 through 40 is them building the tabernacle. Word for word, exactly the same as the last 5 chapters. So they build the tabernacle, wiping the sins from the people, allowing for the tabernacle to be built by the hands of Bezalel. But after all this, there has been so much sin and rebellion that it threatens the whole covenant. Should it flare up again and God have to wipe them out? Because keep in mind, he's just. He's forgiving. But if they keep going and just shirk his forgiveness, he has to be just. And if it's to the point of oppressing foreigners and oppressing those other ones with him, he will absolutely open the earth and swallow them up like little snakes. What? Okay, but after this, there's been so much sin, God will have to wipe them out for good if it threatens the covenant and flares up again. So it ends, the whole book ends with the Israelites looking a lot like Pharaoh looked at the beginning. And Moses, even Moses, is not allowed to enter the tabernacle in the book of Exodus because of the nation's sin to enter the tabernacle, for it's too holy and it would kill him. So the question that is posed at the very end of Exodus is, how can this be fixed? And how can anybody gain access to or dwell with Yahweh now that he's dwelling with people? If he's too holy to approach, then that's cool that he's dwelling with us, but how are we going to hear him? How are we going to know him? How are we going to be around him if we can't get near him? That's a great question, because that's what the book of Leviticus is all about. So that's Exodus. We've hit all these. We've talked a lot about Yahweh's nose. It's a really fun Yahweh's nose book. We drew this up here. There's probably a lot more that we could draw, but we're not going to this week. But that is where it ends. Next week, we'll do a recap again. Next week, we're going to hit Leviticus and Numbers, maybe a little bit of Deuteronomy. The reason I'm hitting them together is because they function together. The first sentence of Leviticus and the first sentence of Numbers are almost identical with very particular changes. So it's going to be really cool. Yes. No, I'm glad you said that. Next week's Father's Day. Please don't show up. I will not be here. I will probably be fathering it up. I don't know what fathers do. Still figuring that out. But I'll probably be playing golf, or I don't know what dads do. I'm in my early 20s, and I feel like I'm 50. So we will not meet next week. We will meet the week after, and then it's going to be every week after this. So like this is the first 2 weeks we've hit. There's a break, and then the next 5 are all going to be. So next week it will be Leviticus, Numbers. 2 weeks Leviticus, Numbers. Week after that will be Deuteronomy and the rest of the Old Testament. So we're going to hit like 30-something books, 40, 50-something, 60-something. No, 30-something books. You were right, Gigi. It was 30-something. So with that said, do we have any questions? Anything we want to talk about? Anything that's like, man, you didn't talk about this, and this is super important. Like we didn't talk about Aaron and his sons at all. We didn't talk about the priesthood at all. We didn't talk about what? Moses. Oh, we did. You came in late. Remember? That's right. That's right. Yeah. But yeah, anything that we missed? Yes.
I find it interesting. That's interesting when you talk about those things following nations and blessing out curse those who curse you. And it reminded me, was it Cain or was it when God sent me? We talked about the grandsons. Basically, they knew
the promise, but didn't know anything about Yahweh. Yes.
Was it Cain?
It was. Yeah, it was Cain and his family. Yes. Yeah.
So was it the same language? That's right.
It was pretty much the same. Yeah, it was. I will avenge or yet destroy those who try and hurt Cain. So how much more will he? Yeah. Yeah.
And even like, because it just came up to me yesterday or this morning actually about the crucifixion of Jesus and how those words have always bothered me about. How he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Always bothered me. And how it was actually my Nikki Dumble Alpha class thing. But he talked about how it's so would have for the reader brought up Psalm 22.
Yeah.
And like it would have just downloaded that whole song for them.
Right. Yeah.
So anyways, that's why I thought, okay,
yes.
in on that, it's very interesting.
And that is what we hopefully we'll see going through even just the first 5 books of the Bible is you will see them all hyperlinked to one another. And then when we get to Jesus, you will see so much more even hyperlinked. And that's kind of the point because obviously Yahweh wrote them. And Yahweh is who we're trying to meet and learn. And we'll learn the story of Israel, and that's all great if we learn it. But the point of the class and what I really want you guys to see is who Yahweh is in the Old Testament, because a lot of people will say, the God of the Old Testament, he's just so much different. When Jesus shows up, he's all loving everybody and smoking pot and stuff. It's like, time out. Like, so it is. It's very important because if we see who Yahweh is and we get his attributes and we see what he's like and we see his nose, then when Jesus shows up on the scene, we can see they're a mirror image. There is literally no deviation anywhere. And that's what's so cool because if you can read your Bible that way, then you won't have any issues when you run into issue verses where like, well, God told Saul to lie about where he was when he was anointed king. It's like, how can God do that? God can't lie. It's like, okay, well, the point is that Yahweh told him to do something. Like, let's get back on track, and it'll help with those difficult, tough verses that you'll find, or Canaanite genocide and all this other stuff people want to throw around. But it does. It helps if you can see Jesus and Yahweh in that same light. Then you really won't have any trouble reading most of Scripture. Yeah.
Does he say something like that about us? Ultimately, like that he will bless those who bless us. We we are blessed for generations. We curse those who curse us.
Well,
Ultimately, even if we don't see it.
Peter reiterates the kingdom of priests unto all the nations in his, I'll say gospel of Peter. It's not a gospel account. In the letter, in the epistle of Peter, he reiterates that same language. I don't think he specifically says blessing and curses, but the point is when they pull, just like with Psalm 22, like you said on the cross, when you pull a line out, you don't just read the line. You need to know the context of the verse or where he got it. Like when Jesus is saying, you've heard it said, don't kill your brother, but I say this. Jesus can say that, but I say this because he sees the heart of Yahweh in the whole Torah, not just in that one line. So it's the same. When Peter quotes that, he's pulling the whole blessing. The blessing of, if they bless you, well, they'll bless you. If they curse you, will curse you. And we even see that in the book of Acts. All those people that are cursing, right, the Christians and trying to keep them down, the whole joke of the book of Acts is they throw so many things at Paul, and at the end, he's just living life preaching the gospel. Like it doesn't matter how much they curse him. They're the ones that lose. They're the ones that lose their ship in the shipwreck. They're the ones that lose all their people. They're the ones that lose part of the Sanhedrin to the Jesus movement. And yet, Jesus comes out on top, though he's been crushed. So it's supposed to pull all that language. Like I guess that's probably the only other place where it does say specifically from that promise. But yeah, I'd say it's still.
That's the picture that we are the priests before God.
Yes.
That doesn't move Israel out. We didn't replace Israel. We've been grafted in with Israel. Paul's very particular about that in the book of Romans, that you not get that mixed up. You've been grafted in. And so you got the language there that now the priesthood belongs to all those who will come and call upon the name of Yeshua. And going back to Peter, he says, you were not a people before, but you are now a people. When he's talking about it's God's people.
Right.
We didn't have the promises. We were not a nation. We weren't a priesthood, but now you are. And so in that vein of thinking, you have been brought in, and it talks about now that you are the children of Abraham, or the seed, the offspring of Abraham. And so the promises of Abraham are passed down to who? His children. So now you are part of that, not through natural birth, but through adoption. And so that's where Paul then begins to talk about that, this idea of adoption and becoming a child. Well, adoption in that time, you could write your own children out, but you cannot write an adopted child out of inheritance. And so when you become adopted, you come into the family and have a right to the inheritance. So that promise is to you in the fact that now we have a New Testament Christ-centered understanding that we're not the original. We have been grafted in, thereby the promises to Abraham
are now ours.
Yeah. And so that promise is to you in that vein that you're a child of God, and he's not going to look favorably on somebody who does you wrong.
Right.
What does that mean? That's up to Yahweh. He don't necessarily, come and block them with a brick upside the head because we want to. But they're not going to fare favorably because of that. And then he promises you this in your troubles, that no weapon formed against you will prosper. And every tongue that rises against you in a false accusation, he says, you have the power to condemn.
Yeah.
You condemn. He said, you condemn. We condemn those lies.
Yeah.
And so, did have me and Nehemiah were kind of worried here, Josh.
Oh no.
That
What'd you do?
Yahweh, we've seen the attribute of he visits the sin of the parents, the third generation. And so, my father, he did some bad things, but, or Nehemiah still in that line of that curse? Is Yahweh still doing that to us?
That's a great question. For Yahweh, maybe, probably not. Probably not. But actually, it leads me to the last thing that I want to say. And it's not an answer to that question, sadly, but it sort of is. What we see in the book of Exodus is Yahweh can do, and this take it with you with the rest of the Bible. Take it with you the rest of your life. Yahweh can do whatever he wants. And it's justified. And some people will be like, oh, well, so he could do this. Hear what I said. Yahweh can do whatever he wants. And what Yahweh wants to do is this stuff here for the sake of redemption. Yahweh doesn't want to lie, so he's not going to. Yahweh doesn't want to murder, so he's not going to. Yahweh doesn't want to trash the entire world, so he's not going to. Yahweh doesn't want to be the evil judge that just slams you down whenever you make a wrong decision, so he's not going to. But he does want the oppressed unoppressed. He does want his children to love him. He does want these things that we see in Scripture. And so it's just important to note, we never need to put God on trial, but we need to understand he can do whatever he wants and it's justified. He just only does what is good. So it's a fun little. So
I'll relieve Nemo.
okay, that's good.
So Christ, it says that Christ freed us from the curse of sin by becoming a curse himself. And so since that pronunciation is on those who are cursed, it could happen for the unredeemed. But the blood of Jesus Christ cleanses us and breaks the curse and the cycle of curse for us. And so now we get redeemed through that because once again, Yahweh can pronounce that, but he's still Yahweh when he then says, well, the blood was sufficient. Therefore, I will win.
Well, and it covers all sins. So that's even, is there sin forced upon you?
I don't believe these kids think.
I was wondering. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Basically, if your dad messes up, sorry, Nemo. It's on you, buddy. It's kind of like student. It's not. It's kind of like other loans. Like if your dad had a bunch of loans and then he dies, welcome to the club, buddy. You now inherit all those loans, unless they're student loans. If it's his student loans, they go away once he's gone.
Or right now.
That's true. So, any other questions or concerns or comments about? I see these guys are raising their hand. No, I'm just kidding. They're playing. About the book of Exodus or Genesis that we've seen so far. Or there could be a question, how boring is the next class going to be because it's Leviticus and Numbers? It's going to be fun, actually. You guys are going to write all 600 laws. It's going to be so much fun. You guys are going to love it. Do we have any other questions?
I haven't been thinking all day.
Yes.
I read something just today, and I was like, I've never seen that at the end of the fruit of the Spirit line. Talking about fruit of the Spirit, it's Galatians 5, and it was saying, because of all these things, or outside of all these things,
there is no law.
There is no law.
Yes. Yes. We will talk about the fruits of the Spirit when, yes. Yes.
Oh, it was in the baby. It was in the nursery. I was reading the book to get the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. Do you have a question? Yes, Mr. Isa.
I was just going to ask. One, I found a scripture that Jeff was referring to. Romans chapter 5, starting with verse 2. How do you explain Moses seemingly changing the mind of God?
Okay. Yeah.
So he pleads, God, I'm just my mom, he pleads with God.
So, and this is how I look at it. So don't say that this is the Bible, but this is what I see that kind of lines up with it. Is Yahweh would have still been completely correct and fulfilled his prophecy if he killed everybody but Moses. Why? Because Moses is an Israelite, and he could have his whole thing is, I can restart with you, Moses. Moses is still a son of Abram. There would be no issue. He could have wiped everybody out on that mountain and still been Yahweh who keeps his promises. It would have just taken another couple of generations to get it that big. But at the same time, he was also looking for, since you're the only one who walked up this mountain, are you willing to stick with my promises? Because you can walk away, you can go sin, you can do, you can go down the mountain and go sin with him if you want, which I don't want you to do and be wiped out. But will you, I've told you now the law, I've told you these things, I've told you who I am, I've told you my promises. Will you hold people accountable to see them through? And when he steps up and says, but God, remember you promised this, God says, you're exactly what I'm looking for. Because even if it's just you, if you're on board with my promises and my whole thing is I need to connect man and God again and dwell among you, then I need a man I can dwell among. The only reason he built that tabernacle is because Moses said, no, you promised to stay with us. He says to Moses, I'll stay with you. I'll let you elect your stupid brother Aaron as a priest and get both of his sons killed because he's so stupid. But I'll dwell with you guys because of you, Moses. So that's how I look at that whole scene, and it's really cool when you see it in that light, because it's not that God changed his mind; it's that God's mind was made up; he was going to fulfill his promise. But if he can get somebody on board to walk with him, then great, he can now dwell among man, which we see the rest of the Bible. Yes.
When the Egyptians were chasing the Israelites down, didn't God send a fire down to block them?
Well, it says the angel of the Lord and the cloud that they were following went to block the rear. So it could have been the fire, it could have been the dust. It wasn't night, so it was probably the fire. I know in the movie, I think it's a wall of fire because it's nighttime. But it does say that it was like really bright on the other side. So it was nighttime because it says at the end of the night they walked through. But I guess it was nighttime for the Egyptians and daytime for the Israelites. Kind of cool. Just kind of like the book of Joshua. Yes.
So I was just going to go back to what I was saying there. And that you trying to show the attributes later on, and then the New Testament shows the same kind of restraint. Have to be stoned.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And it also in light of that, where he's continually, if you're going to look like the snake, I'm going to send you into the abyss to your home, where he swallowed up corn and all that. It's interesting then if you put that idea behind Ananias and Sapphira, because we're getting ready to move into an age of grace, but it's almost like God's reminding them, I'm still the same Yahweh.
Yeah, I am still
If
holy.
you want to lie and look like a snake, I'll send you
There is a
home
place
the
for it.
same.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then he moves into great compassion and mercy.
Right. But that is still a reminder to keep in the back of our brains. At any point, God would be completely justified in just being like, you know what? No mercy today. And it would be fine. Because he can do, yes.
As you are saying that, I know obviously God created, he's creative. So we're used
Right.
to being creative. He's given man such free will that I'm almost seeing him has got Moses absent. It's like he's continuing to be creative among his
Yeah.
creation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's infinitely creative, so nothing catches him off guard. Yet he works amongst us creatively even now, so we should go to him and be asking him.
Yeah.
He's creating as we, anyway, I've just never seen
Yeah.
it before.
Yeah. No, and that is my hope. We'll go ahead and end class and say it's over. But it is my hope that we will see things that we've never seen before. Because even like in my study, and I think I said it last week, like I saw things in Exodus that's like, oh, I never would have seen that if somebody didn't tell me. And so like I listen to podcasts or whatever, mostly Bible Project and whatever they hear. I'm like, oh, okay, that was really good. But yeah, so your reading assignment for the next 2 weeks is read Leviticus and Numbers.